I am completely agree with all the obstacles and with all the enemies who are between me and what I want to do. I see that they cooperate.
Federico Fellini stands as one of cinema's true visionaries, a director whose films blurred the line between dreams and reality. With masterpieces like La Dolce Vita, 8½, and Amarcord, he created a cinematic language filled with surreal images, eccentric characters, and bold storytelling choices. Over the years, sensational headlines have claimed that Fellini, shortly before his death, revealed a list of actors he hated the most.
To try to understand what really the coral are in a detached way, you have to become a yogi. You have to, and in a certain way, I have had a very funny experience because just trying to see my set and the faces of my actor.
But as with many clickbait myths, the truth is more complicated and far more interesting. Fellini rarely spoke in terms of hate. In fact, he often described himself as loving actors, even the most difficult ones. What he truly hated were shallow characters, false glamour, and the idea of cinema reduced to mere prettiness. Yet his colorful way with words and his provocative descriptions sometimes made it sound as if he was insulting the very performers he admired.
It was a little bit disappointing, the experience. I have not remembered to have proved a special sensation. But the doctor gave to me an explanation.
This video takes you behind the headlines to explore the real stories. The biting phrases Fellini used, the actors who sometimes felt tyrannized on his sets, and the unusual faces he cherished above all else. By the end, you'll see that Fellini's so-called hatreds reveal more about his art and his humanity than about the actors themselves. Number 6. Working under a tyrant. When Federico Fellini described himself, he often painted the picture of a benevolent ringmaster in a circus of actors, charming, imaginative, and endlessly fascinated by people. But if you ask some of the performers who actually worked with him, the picture is far less idyllic. To them, the great maestro of Italian cinema could sometimes feel less like a ringmaster and more like a tyrant. Take Donald Sutherland, for example. Cast in Fellini's Casanova after Marcello Mastroianni proved unavailable, Sutherland entered into a filmmaking experience unlike any he'd ever known. Looking back, he didn't sugarcoat it. In the documentary Fellini, I'm a Born Liar, Sutherland admitted, the first 5 weeks of shooting were hell on earth. He went further, flatly calling Fellini a tyrant.
He's always making jokes. I was with him one day when he did an interview with a journalist, He did a television interview and they were asking him, it was before the release of Amarcord, and they said, what is Amarcord about? He said, Amarcord is a film that I have made about a Swedish abortionist.
For a Hollywood actor used to more structured sets, Fellini's methods, constantly improvising, pushing actors past exhaustion, and demanding total submission to his vision, were a shock to the system. And it wasn't only the actors who felt this way. Producer Daniel Toscan Duplantier once remarked that working with Fellini was like handing yourself over to someone who's out to destroy you. That sounds brutal, but in context, it reflected the overwhelming power Fellini wielded on his sets. He controlled every detail, from the way a costume hung to how an extra shifted in the background. For many collaborators, surrendering to Fellini's vision meant giving up any illusion of personal agency. Yet here's the paradox. Those same actors who complained about tyranny often admitted that the results were extraordinary. Sutherland might have described the shoot as torture, but his performance in Casanova remains one of the most haunting of his career.
My name is Donald Sutherland, and the fella that I'm playing is named Michael Lechner Dorn.
The film's cold, alienating tone owed as much to Fellini's relentless demands as it did to Sutherland's talent. In a strange way, the tyranny paid off on screen. This duality, Affection mixed with suffering was part of the Fellini experience. To his mind, actors were like instruments in an orchestra. They had to be tuned, played, and sometimes pushed to the breaking point to make music. He didn't see this as cruelty, but as necessity. Puppets are happy to be puppets if the puppeteer is a good puppeteer, he once said.
C'est une chose, il est vital, il y a toujours de la moralité. J'ai choisi cette histoire, cette période de décadence.
To Fellini, it was simply part of the job. His responsibility was to coax magic from chaos, even if his actors felt battered in the process. So, was Fellini a tyrant or a genius? Depending on who you ask, he was both. His actors might have walked away bruised, but they also carried with them the memory of having been part of cinematic history. That tension, admiration laced with resentment, is why Fellini's reputation as a director remains both celebrated and intimidating. Do you think Fellini's demanding style made his films better, or did it push actors too far? Number 5. I love to work with actors. Federico Fellini has a reputation for being controlling, eccentric, even tyrannical. Yet, if you listen to the man himself, you'd hear a very different story. In the 2002 documentary, Fellini, "I'm a born liar," the director insists without hesitation. "I love to work with actors. I get along with actors, even the most difficult ones. Capricious actresses, prima donnas. I never had any problems." That statement might sound hard to believe after hearing Donald Sutherland call him a tyrant. But it captures something essential about Fellini's approach. He adored actors for their contradictions. To him, they were peacocks, children, dreamers, and extroverts all at once. Far from being annoyed by those qualities, he delighted in them. He once explained that actors were happiest when they were guided firmly, saying, "Puppets are happy to be puppets if the puppeteer is a good puppeteer." It's a provocative metaphor, but in Fellini's world, it was meant as a compliment. He believed actors wanted to be led, that their best work emerged when they surrendered to a director who could shape their raw instincts into art. His confidence in this role was absolute, and it gave him the freedom to demand complete commitment from his cast. At the same time, Fellini's affection for actors wasn't blind flattery. He had a way of teasing out their quirks, exposing their vanity, and laughing at their excesses. To him, those imperfections weren't flaws, but part of the magic. He believed actors were unique creatures, drawn to the spotlight not just out of talent, but from a deep, childlike need to be seen. Instead of judging that, he embraced it and built his films around it. This attitude explains why so many performers, from Marcello Mastroianni to Giulietta Messina, from Anita Ekberg to Sandra Milo, returned to him again and again. They knew he would challenge them, sometimes even frustrate them, but also that he cherished what they brought to the screen.
Well, it's a historical picture that happened 300 years after Christ. And I'm the queen of Palmyra, which is a part, or was a part, of Syria. And I go into war with the Romans. I break the...
He offered them not just roles, but archetypes. The temptress, the dreamer, the clown, the tragic fool. In his hands, actors didn't just play characters. They embodied entire ideas. There's also a sense of play in how Fellini directed. He often described filmmaking as a game and actors as his playmates.
L'apparecchio attraverso il quale stiamo apparendo in questo momento ai telespettatori, ammesso che non abbiano già cambiato canale con quell'apparecchietto.
Even when the work was grueling, he injected humor, spontaneity, and a touch of the absurd into his direction. That balance, loving control mixed with playful freedom, is what made his collaborations so distinctive. So when Fellini said he loved working with actors, he wasn't just making a polite statement. He meant it. His affection was real, even if it sometimes came wrapped in demands that left his performers exhausted. For him, actors were indispensable co-dreamers. He might push them, prod them, or even frighten them, but at the heart of it, he loved them. And that love is what kept them coming back, eager to dive once more into Fellini's strange, dazzling worlds. If you were an actor, would you prefer a director who treats you like a collaborator, or like a puppet, as Fellini sometimes admitted? Number 4. Faces from Dreams. One of Federico Fellini's greatest trademarks as a filmmaker wasn't just the surreal imagery or the dreamlike stories, it was the faces. Watch La Dolce Vita or Fellini Satyricon, and you'll notice something unusual. The people on screen often look nothing like the glamorous movie stars of Hollywood. Instead, they appear eccentric, peculiar, sometimes even grotesque. That wasn't an accident. Fellini deliberately went hunting for unusual people, convinced their presence would make his films feel more authentic and more like the visions in his head. Film critic Roger Ebert visited the set of Fellini Satyricon in 1969 and observed exactly this. Instead of a cast full of polished professionals, Fellini filled his Roman dreamscape with strange and unforgettable faces. When asked where he found them, Fellini answered with his usual blend of honesty and mysticism. People ask, "Where did you find these faces?" None of them are professional actors. These faces come from my private dreams. To achieve this, Fellini literally opened a small office in Rome where anyone could walk in and audition. He wasn't looking for training or resumes. He was looking for eyes that told a story, smiles that hid secrets, bodies that carried the weight of real life. He invited street performers, shopkeepers, farmers, and anyone with a striking look to stand before his camera. If their faces matched the images in his dreams, they were cast. Why did he do this? Because Fellini believed that truth lay not in conventional beauty, but in exaggeration. A lined, weary face could tell more about life than a polished Hollywood jawline.
Poi delle braccia forti di mio padre che mi sollevavano, mi tenevano in braccio e appariva dentro un fascio così tutto fibrillante di fumo, delle grandi faccione bistrate. Il primo film che ho visto si chiamava Maciste all'inferno e io tento sempre di rifare quello. Tutta la mia filmografia praticamente si riferisce a quel film.
An eccentric expression could capture the essence of humanity better than another square-jawed leading man. For Fellini, cinema was not about reproducing reality, but heightening it. And for that, he needed faces that looked like they had wandered in from another world. This approach wasn't always easy on the actors themselves. Non-professionals often struggled to follow direction, and Fellini sometimes had to coax performances out of them with gestures, jokes, or even pantomime. But he relished the challenge. In his eyes, their lack of training was a gift. It allowed him to shape them like clay without preset habits getting in the way. Critics often pointed out how these funny-looking people contributed to the uncanny atmosphere of Fellini's films. They made his visions feel lived in, raw, and strange. It was as if the dream world of his imagination had spilled directly onto the screen, populated by the kinds of faces you might glimpse in a carnival, a marketplace, or yes, a dream. So when Fellini spoke of his actors coming from my private dreams, he wasn't exaggerating. He truly saw cinema as a form of collective dreaming, and his actors, professional or not, were the dream figures who inhabited that realm. They weren't stars in the Hollywood sense. They were dreamers, clowns, phantoms, and saints. And that's exactly what Fellini wanted his films to be filled with.
But the doctor gave to me an explanation, and I am agree with him. He said that an artist lives always in the imagination, so the barrier between the sensational reality and his imagination is very vague. You know?
Yes.
An artist is always here and there.
Yes.
Do you find it more powerful to watch polished Hollywood stars? Or do strange, unusual faces stick with you longer in films? Number 3. Send me your most decadent actors. Federico Fellini had a way of turning even the most ordinary casting decisions into theatrical spectacles. For him, choosing an actor wasn't just about talent. It was about energy, aura, and whether their very presence could carry the mythic weight of his films. This instinctive approach is beautifully illustrated in a story recounted by British actor Terence Stamp, who once received an unforgettable call from Fellini. Originally, Fellini wanted Peter O'Toole for a role in a planned Edgar Allan Poe anthology project. But when O'Toole declined, Fellini didn't quietly browse headshots or hold conventional auditions. Instead, he picked up the phone and gave one of the most Fellini-esque instructions imaginable to a casting director. Send me your most decadent actors. The word decadent summed up so much of what Fellini loved. figures who embodied extravagance, mystery, sensuality, and a touch of ruin. That command led directly to Tyrant's stamp. Known at the time for his striking beauty and magnetic screen presence, Stamp represented both allure and fragility. When he eventually met Fellini, he was struck not by cruelty or disdain, but by warmth.
I hadn't exactly retired, but things had sort of stopped for me at the end of the 60s, you know. I'd stopped getting first division offers, you know, and I was spoiled. I didn't want to go straight down to third division, you know. So I just took off and I did other things. And then I was actually in India when I had this telegram arrive saying, would I come back to London and meet
One of the most wonderful human beings, full of life, witty, smart, Stamp later recalled. The idea that Fellini had chosen him not because of his resume, but because he embodied decadence, amused him but also felt strangely fitting. This anecdote highlights how Fellini's mind worked. For him, casting wasn't about bankable names or Hollywood box office, it was about creating a living tapestry of personalities. He wanted faces and bodies that suggested something larger than life, something almost mythological. By asking for decadent actors, he wasn't mocking performers, he was elevating them, turning their quirks and excesses into raw material for art. It's also a reminder of Fellini's sense of humor. He loved to exaggerate, to provoke, to use words in ways that startled people. To call someone decadent could easily sound insulting, but in his hands, it became almost a compliment. It meant you had mystery, charisma, and the kind of aura that would light up the dreamlike world he was building. For Stamp, working with Fellini became a treasured memory. He saw firsthand how Fellini directed not just with instructions, but with energy. Fellini might gesture wildly, tell strange stories, or even mimic what he wanted, creating a mood that actors could slip into. That sense of playfulness helped turn potentially difficult experiences into joyful collaborations.
Cioè mi piace avere l'amicizia più molto stima di Michelangelo, sia come artista, come cinematografico, anche come uomo. Cioè la cosa che più mi piace, mi entusiasma.
In the end, the phrase, "send me your most decadent actors," has become part of Fellini lore, shorthand for his unique vision of cinema. He wasn't after the polished or the predictable. He wanted performers who carried danger, excess, and strangeness in their bones. And that instinct, more than anything, is what kept his films alive with such haunting, unforgettable characters. If a director described you as decadent, would you take it as an insult or as a compliment? Number 2. Casting Donald Sutherland. When Federico Fellini set out to make Il Casanova di Federico Fellini in the mid-1970s, he faced one of the most unusual challenges of his career.
Dopo abbiamo fatto il Toby Dammit invece e ci siamo trovati, eravamo già compagni di scuola, ci consideravamo compagni di università.
Producer Dino De Laurentiis wanted a romantic, glamorous film about the legendary womanizer Giacomo Casanova. Fellini, however, admitted openly that he loathed Casanova as a figure. He didn't see him as heroic or even especially romantic. Instead, he saw Casanova as vain, shallow, and joyless, a man trapped by his own reputation. That contempt for the character shaped everything about the film, including casting. Early on, producers floated the idea of a conventional Hollywood star. Names like Robert Redford and even Marlon Brando were suggested, the sort of handsome leading men who could sell Casanova as a magnetic seducer. Fellini flatly rejected them. To him, casting a matinee idol would betray his vision. He wasn't interested in celebrating Casanova, he wanted to deconstruct him. Enter Donald Sutherland. The Canadian actor wasn't a traditional sex symbol. He was tall, pale, with exaggerated features that could look both aristocratic and unsettling.
About half an hour. Half an hour to get the rubber off and get the hair off. And then about another 15 minutes in the bath to get the mess off. But that's about how it does.
For Fellini, that oddness was exactly the point. In one of his most infamous quips, he explained his choice by describing Sutherland as a sperm-filled waxwork with the eyes of a masturbator. It's an outrageous line, the part insult, part compliment, but in Fellini's world, it made perfect sense. He wasn't trying to flatter his actors, he was trying to define their essence. Sutherland himself later recalled the experience as grueling. Fellini demanded absolute obedience, often treating him more like a puppet than a collaborator. The first 5 weeks of shooting were hell on earth, Sutherland admitted, calling Fellini a tyrant.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Brown air and
I look quite a bit like Casanova. I mean, in terms of the way Fellini has put it all together again, in terms of height, in terms of physical structure. And the other aspects of being a typical Italian lover. Casanova was not really typical.
But even he couldn't deny the results. Fellini sculpted Sutherland into a grotesque, hollow version of Casanova. Not a man of passion, but a man of emptiness. The film itself shocked audiences. Instead of a glamorous tale of seduction, Fellini presented Casanova as a tragic clown, a prisoner of his own image. Sutherland's stiff movements and eerie makeup turned him into something almost inhuman, a wax doll going through the motions of love. It was precisely what Fellini wanted, an anti-romance that reflected his distaste for the myth of Casanova. Critics were divided. Some praised the daring vision, others found it alienating, but nobody could deny its originality. Fellini had once again proven that he was willing to defy expectations, even if it meant insulting his leading man in the process.
And then after a little while, he realized that the future didn't exist, and so he took care of her future constantly. He arranged marriages, he gave gifts, he did all those things. But he was not deceitful.
That sperm-filled waxwork line may sound cruel, but in Fellini's language, it was almost a badge of honor. He believed cinema should exaggerate reality, twist it into grotesque shapes to reveal hidden truths. Donald Sutherland, with his unusual presence, became the perfect vessel for Fellini's strange, unsettling dream. Fellini called Sutherland a sperm-filled waxwork. Do you think blunt honesty like that is necessary for art, or just cruelty disguised as vision? Number 1. Hating the man, not the actors. At the very top of this list lies Federico Fellini's most famous declaration of dislike. But it wasn't aimed at any actor. It was aimed at a character, Giacomo Casanova, the legendary Venetian lover.
And it's taken, well, altogether 6 years, but I wrote the script as Sally Canto, who's the head of programming for CBC, was hugely influential.
When producer Dino De Laurentiis first suggested Fellini adapt Casanova's life for the screen, Fellini balked. He later admitted he loathed Casanova. To him, Casanova was not a romantic hero, but a figure of vanity, emptiness, and grotesque self-indulgence. Why such disdain? Fellini explained it in deeply personal terms. He confessed that when he read Casanova's memoirs, he saw flashes of his own flaws mirrored back at him. The moodiness, the narcissism, the obsession with appearances. I loathed Casanova because he reflected my own defects, Fellini told one interviewer. Making the film, he said, became almost an exorcism. The moody and unreliable part of me had to die. Through Casanova, he confronted a distorted image of himself, hoping the act of telling the story would cleanse those traits from his psyche. This is an extraordinary admission from a filmmaker who often cloaked his personal feelings in symbolism. Instead of denying the connection, Fellini leaned into it, turning his dislike of Casanova into the very engine of the movie. He envisioned Casanova not as a charming libertine, but as a hollow shell, a man going through the motions of pleasure without ever finding true intimacy. The irony, of course, is that Fellini's hatred of the character only heightened his need to find the perfect actor to embody that emptiness. This is where Donald Sutherland came in, as we explored in the previous section. But it's crucial to remember that Fellini's disdain was never for the actor. He never said he hated Sutherland, or Marcello Mastroianni, or any of his collaborators. His passion, sometimes disguised as cruelty, was reserved for the fictional figures he sought to deconstruct. And what did this hatred achieve? It gave Il Casanova di Federico Fellini its haunting power. Instead of a romantic epic, the audience saw a grotesque carnival of mechanical seductions, with Casanova reduced to a clownish figure of ridicule. For some critics, it was too much, a joyless exercise. But for others, it was a revelation. Fellini had stripped the myth bare and revealed the loneliness beneath. Looking back, it's telling that Fellini's most explicit use of the word hate was directed at a historical figure, not a living colleague. He could be blunt, outrageous, even insulting when describing actors. But at heart, he loved working with them.
Means that even if this road maybe is dangerous, I think that when one has had the intuition or the feeling, or one has opened that little door, I don't think that it can come back. I think that it's necessary to try to go on.
His contempt was aimed at illusions, at the lies society tells about love, sex, and fame. In Casanova, he saw a mirror of those lies, and he attacked it with all his cinematic fury. That's why the headline about Fellini naming actors he hated misses the point. He didn't hate his actors. He hated the masks people wore, the empty roles they played in life. And by making Casanova, he turned that hatred into one of his strangest, most personal films. Do you think a director can make a stronger film when they dislike the character? Or does that risk turning the movie into a personal vendetta? So, after peeling back the layers of gossip and clickbait, what do we really find about Federico Fellini? The truth is far more fascinating than any fake hate list. Fellini didn't despise his actors. He adored them. He once said, "I love to work with actors, even the most difficult ones." That affection rang through his career, from Marcello Mastroianni's suave melancholy in La Dolce Vita to Giulietta Massina's heartbreak in Nights of Cabiria. When Fellini used strong language, it was usually to describe characters or ideas, not people. He loathed Casanova not because of the man who played him, but because Casanova represented vanity, emptiness, and shallow pleasures. Everything Fellini feared in himself. He mocked Donald Sutherland as a sperm-filled waxwork, not because he disliked Sutherland, but because he believed Sutherland's unique features embodied Casanova's hollowness. And when he asked for decadent actors, he wasn't insulting. He was celebrating the excess and mystery he wanted on screen.
And I read it, and for me, it was the most important political work that I'd seen in years. I thought maybe this will wake up what had been a dormant generation.
Even the actors who called him a tyrant or said his sets felt like hell on earth usually admitted later that the results were worth it. Fellini's vision was demanding, sometimes overwhelming, but it always came from passion, not malice. So no, Fellini never made a hit list of actors he hated. Instead, he chased his dream faces, his eccentric personalities, his oddball clowns and saints. He shaped cinema by loving actors too much, not too little. And that leaves us with a question for you. Fellini believed that strange, unusual faces could reveal more truth than traditional beauty. Do you agree? Do the quirks and imperfections of actors make films more powerful than polished Hollywood looks? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of cinema's legends.